King, the invisible mastermind, watched from the shadows as the Dockside Crew, the Everton Boys, and the Strand Syndicate tore Liverpool apart. Every shipment stolen, every street claimed, and every life taken was part of his plan, yet no one knew who he really was or where he would strike next. Liverpool streets have always told two stories, one of pride, music and history, and another of fear, crime, and survival. Beneath the rhythm of the city's nightlife and the noise of the docks, a silent war was building. It began quietly, in the narrow back streets where poverty met ambition. Young men with nothing to lose were drawn into a world that promised power, money, and respect. They were the forgotten ones, products of broken homes and hard times, who found their escape in the only thing that seemed to offer control, crime. The police saw the rise in petty thefts, drug dealing, and violent assaults, but few realized what was really taking shape. Liverpool wasn't just breeding criminals, it was creating soldiers for a war that was yet to begin. The change started around the turn of the millennium. The global drug trade was shifting, and Liverpool's port, once the pride of Britain, became a perfect gateway for smuggling. Shipments arrived from South America, hidden in containers of fruit, electronics, or furniture. It was easy money for anyone willing to take the risk. Soon, local gangs formed alliances with foreign cartels, and the streets of Merseyside turned into a battlefield for dominance. Among these early groups were small-time thugs who would later become legends in the city's criminal history. They operated out of abandoned warehouses, using burner phones and coded messages. What began as survival quickly turned into greed, and greed turned into bloodshed. The police tried to contain it, but Liverpool's criminal network grew faster than anyone could control. From Dockside to Everton, young recruits were trained in violence, learning how to hide drugs, move weapons, and keep their mouths shut. Fear spread across entire neighborhoods. People stopped talking to officers. Shops began closing early, and the sound of gunshots became a part of nightly life. The city that had once been known for its humor and resilience was turning into a war zone. Families who had lived in Liverpool for generations started moving away, leaving behind empty homes that became drug dens and safehouses. Amid the growing chaos, a shipment of cocaine worth over £5 million went missing from the docks. No one knew who stole it, but everyone wanted it back. It was the spark that ignited the full-scale gang war that would define Liverpool's criminal landscape for years to come. The theft set off a chain reaction of killings and revenge attacks. Overnight, graffiti appeared marking territories. Cars were torched. Businesses that refused to pay protection money were destroyed. The authorities called it a criminal feud, but those who lived in the middle of it knew it was something much worse. A battle for the city's soul. For the ordinary citizens of Liverpool, the transformation was terrifying. A city once built on community spirit had been divided by fear. Neighbors no longer trusted each other. Children learned early which streets to avoid. Everyone knew someone involved, even if they never spoke about it. And as the police scrambled to understand the new structure of power forming beneath their noses, one truth became clear. Liverpool's underworld wasn't just a group of criminals anymore. It was an empire in the making, hidden behind friendly smiles and familiar streets, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal its strength. The real war was only beginning. The underworld of Liverpool began to organize itself with brutal precision. Chaos gave birth to structure, and soon the city's criminal landscape was divided among three dominant factions. Each gang ruled with its own set of rules, methods, and motives, carving out territories as if drawing invisible borders across the map. The first to rise was the Dockside Crew, a group that controlled the smuggling routes through the River Mersey. They had deep connections in the shipping industry, with dock workers, freight handlers, and even customs officers on their payroll. Their operations were clean, professional, and ruthlessly efficient. Drugs from South America and Eastern Europe flowed through their hands like water. They didn't make noise. They made money, and that kept them untouchable for years. Then came the Everton Boys, a younger, wilder generation of gangsters, who grew up idolizing the older crime lords. They didn't have access to ships or global connections, But they had something equally powerful: control over the streets. They ruled the housing estates, where poverty and addiction made it easy to recruit soldiers. The Everton Boys dealt directly to the addicts, collecting cash faster than anyone else. They were unpredictable, armed with cheap guns and quick tempers, and their reputation for violence spread fear across the north of the city. They thrived on chaos, and their power came not from strategy, but from the terror they created wherever they went. The third and most mysterious group was the Strand Syndicate. They were businessmen pretending to be legitimate investors, using front companies, car dealerships, and construction firms to launder millions in illegal money. While the Dockside Crew controlled supply and the Everton Boys dominated demand, the Strand Syndicate moved quietly in between, managing the financial side of the underworld. They wore suits instead of tracksuits, drove luxury cars, and moved in social circles that gave them access to politicians and businessmen. Their presence blurred the line between crime and commerce. No one really knew who led them, but their influence reached far beyond the street. These three factions balanced each other in a fragile peace. The Dockside Crew needed the Everton Boys to sell their product, while the Syndicate needed both to keep their money clean. It was a perfect system, until greed destroyed it. One night a dockside warehouse was broken into. Security cameras caught only shadows, but when the police arrived, they found a blood-stained floor and an empty storage unit. £2 million worth of cocaine had vanished. The Dockside Crew immediately blamed the Everton Boys, convinced they had grown bold enough to challenge their authority. Retaliation followed swiftly. Dealers disappeared, stash houses were raided, and then first shots of the coming gang war echoed through Liverpool's streets. But beneath the surface, something didn't add up. The theft was too clean, too organized for the Everton Boys. Someone else was pulling the strings, an unknown player who had studied every weakness, every rivalry, and every ambition. The gangs didn't know it yet, but the real threat wasn't from within their ranks. A new force was rising, one that would soon change the balance of power forever, and by the time they realized it, Liverpool's criminal world would already be spiraling out of control. The city of Liverpool descended into chaos as the fragile balance between the three gangs collapsed. What started as whispers of betrayal turned into an all-out street war that consumed entire neighborhoods. Overnight, the tension that had been simmering for years exploded into brutal violence. Cars were set ablaze, gunshots echoed through the night, and messages written in blood appeared on walls as warnings. Families who had lived side by side for generations were suddenly divided by invisible lines of loyalty and fear. Each gang began marking its territory with ruthless precision. One street for the Dockside Crew, another for the Everton Boys, and entire blocks claimed by the Strand Syndicate. The police could no longer distinguish between ordinary citizens and those caught in the web of organized crime. The Dockside Crew struck first, targeting anyone suspected of stealing their missing shipment. Several young men associated with the Everton Boys vanished within days, their bodies later found near the outskirts of the city. In retaliation, the Everton Boys launched their own attacks, torching cars belonging to dockside lieutenants and ambushing their dealers. The violence spiraled beyond control. The Strand Syndicate, which had always preferred to operate from the shadows, now faced a difficult choice: stay neutral and risk losing power, or join the fight and protect their investments. They chose the latter. With money and connections, the syndicate began hiring mercenaries and ex-soldiers, arming them with high-grade weapons smuggled from Europe. But amid the bloodshed, there were strange patterns emerging. Some attacks didn't make sense. Warehouses that belonged to none of the three gangs were destroyed. Safehouses containing weapons and cash were raided without any trace of who had done it. Surveillance footage from one scene showed a white van that didn't belong to any known group. It appeared in different districts on the same nights as multiple attacks, but the plates led nowhere. A few detectives suspected a fourth player was manipulating the chaos, but with stretched resources and a frightened public, there was little they could do. The gangs were too busy destroying each other to notice that someone else was quietly taking control. Liverpool's residents lived in constant fear. The nights grew longer, and the police response became slower as officers were overwhelmed by the scale of violence. Schools closed early, Local shops went out of business, and once busy streets turned silent after sunset. Every day brought new reports: shootings in Dockside, stabbings in Everton, and arsons near the docks. Hospitals were full of young men with gunshot wounds who refused to name their attackers. Behind the scenes, the local media struggled to report the truth, pressured by anonymous threats to stay quiet. In the midst of all this chaos, shipments began moving through the docks again. But not under the Dockside Crew's control. A new organization was silently seizing routes, replacing guards, and rerouting drugs across the country. The original gangs were too distracted by their turf war to notice their empire slipping away. Liverpool had turned into a war zone, but the real winner was hiding in the dark, pulling strings while others bled. The city had entered a new phase of its criminal history, one where the most dangerous enemy was no longer visible, and the war was being fought by ghosts. The mysterious van that appeared across Liverpool's crime scenes led investigators to a name whispered only in the deepest corners of the underworld. The Mercer Group. No one knew where it came from, who led it, or how it operated, but its presence was undeniable. At first, the established gangs dismissed it as another rumor, a ghost story told to scare the street dealers into obedience. But as weeks passed, their money began disappearing. Suppliers stopped answering calls and longtime partners started switching allegiances. Slowly and methodically, the Mercer Group tightened its grip on the city. Its strategy was silent domination. No flashy displays of violence, no open threats, just precision and control. They didn't fight for territory, they absorbed it. The mastermind behind it all was known only as King. His name carried weight, even though few had ever seen him. King was not like the typical street gangster who ruled with rage and impulse. He was educated, patient, and calculating. His background remained a mystery, but rumors claimed he once worked in logistics, which explained how he managed to manipulate Liverpool's entire supply chain. King studied the city's criminal structure like a chessboard, learning every weakness of the Dockside Crew, the Everton Boys, and the Strand Syndicate. Then he began dismantling them piece by piece. He cut off their funding sources, sabotaged shipments, and bribed mid-level members to switch sides. By the time anyone realized what was happening, half of Liverpool's underworld was already working for him. Unlike the old gangs, the Mercer Group operated with military discipline. They used encrypted communication, fake identities, and shell companies spread across Europe. Every transaction was carefully documented, and every move had a purpose. They disguised their drug shipments as medical supplies, construction materials, or electronics. Even the most skilled detectives found it impossible to track them. King's empire grew in silence, and he built it without firing a single public shot. The existing gangs were collapsing from within, their leaders paranoid and desperate. The Dockside Crew lost control of their own docks, the Everton Boys splintered into smaller factions, and the Strand Syndicate found their financial accounts drained. Liverpool's criminal hierarchy had been replaced without anyone realizing it. The Mercer Group didn't just control the streets, they infiltrated the system. They had accountants managing legal businesses, lawyers who specialized in covering financial trails, and corrupt officials ensuring that police investigations went nowhere. King's brilliance lay in blending crime with legitimacy. Every illegal deal had a clean counterpart in the business world. The drugs flowing through Liverpool were now linked to legitimate import companies, and the profits were washed through real estate, nightclubs, and offshore investments. What made King even more dangerous was his invisibility. He never appeared in public, never used his real name, and communicated only through intermediaries. The police couldn't catch someone they couldn't identify, and rival gangs couldn't kill someone they couldn't find. For the first time in Liverpool's dark history, control didn't belong to the loudest or the bloodiest. It belonged to the smartest. King had rewritten the rules of organized crime. While others fought for streets, he conquered the entire city from the shadows, leaving even the most feared gangsters powerless against his quiet, unstoppable rise. As the Mercer Group's power spread across Liverpool, the city's law enforcement agencies began to feel the pressure from every direction. The once chaotic turf wars had gone strangely quiet, but the silence carried a sense of unease. It wasn't peace, it was control. The familiar faces of local gang leaders were either dead in hiding or irrelevant. The real decisions were now being made behind closed doors, in office buildings and luxury apartments. Detectives who had spent their careers chasing drug dealers on the streets were now confronted with a new kind of enemy, organized, intelligent, and invisible. The name King appeared repeatedly in intercepted messages, but no one knew who he was or where he operated from. Every lead turned into a dead end. To fight back, the National Crime Agency launched a joint investigation with Merseyside police. Their goal was simple but nearly impossible: to trace the Mercer Group's money. Financial experts pored over thousands of transactions, shell companies and offshore accounts. What they fed was chilling. The Mercer Group's operations weren't confined to Liverpool. Their network extended across Europe, using fake import businesses and crypto laundering to clean millions of pounds every week. Some companies were registered under the names of dead people, others under fabricated identities that couldn't be traced. It was a criminal structure designed to survive even if its leaders disappeared. The investigation gained traction when an anonymous source leaked documents linking several high-ranking police officers and city officials to suspicious payments. The revelations were explosive. The files showed that key figures responsible for anti-gang operations had been accepting bribes for years, feeding information to the Mercer Group in exchange for protection and money. The scandal shook Liverpool's law enforcement to its core. Public trust in the police collapsed almost overnight. Protests erupted as citizens demanded accountability, while honest officers faced death threats for trying to expose corruption within their own ranks. For the first time, it became clear that the city's criminal empire wasn't operating outside the system, it was woven into it. Meanwhile, the Mercer Group's financial reach continued to expand. They invested in construction projects, transport companies, and real estate developments. On paper, they were legitimate entrepreneurs revitalizing the city. In reality, every property, every contract, and every investment was another layer in King's growing empire. Even banks unknowingly processed their transactions, turning dirty money into clean profit. The streets looked calmer, but behind the calm was total control. Every deal, every drug shipment, and every payoff passed through the Mercer Group's hands. The scale of their dominance left detectives feeling powerless. Traditional policing methods no longer worked, because the criminals they were chasing had evolved. The line between legal and illegal had blurred completely. King had turned Liverpool into his own financial machine, one that funded violence, silenced witnesses, and corrupted institutions from the inside. And yet, despite the chaos and the fear, no one had ever seen his face. The man who ruled Britain's most dangerous streets existed only as a whisper, a shadow, and a signature on a hidden bank account. The turning point came on a cold November night, when a massive explosion tore through a warehouse near the River Mersey. The blast was so powerful that windows shattered half a mile away, and flames lit up the skyline. Among the wreckage, 5 bodies were found, 3 suspected gang members, 1 dock worker, and a 15-year-old boy who had been walking home from football practice. The tragedy sent shockwaves through Liverpool. For a moment, the city united in grief. But beneath the sorrow lay anger and suspicion. People wanted answers, yet none were clear. The police immediately blamed the remaining fragments of the old gangs, calling it a turf dispute gone wrong. But investigators who examined the scene noticed something unusual. There were no signs of a firefight, no evidence of an accident. Everything pointed to a calculated detonation. Behind closed doors, the National Crime Agency began to piece together what really happened. The explosion, they discovered, was not an act of revenge, but a distraction. While emergency services rushed to the burning warehouse, a major drug shipment worth over £10 million slipped through the docks unnoticed. It was a move so audacious that it could only have been planned by someone who understood both the criminal world and law enforcement procedures in detail. All evidence pointed back to the Mercer Group. The incident confirmed what some detectives had long suspected. King was always 2 steps ahead. He had turned tragedy into a smokescreen, using chaos to cover up his operation. The public outrage following the explosion pushed the authorities into action. Dozens of raids were carried out across Liverpool, targeting everyone from street-level dealers to suspected enforcers of the Mercer Group. Armed police flooded the estates. Helicopters circled overhead, and media coverage painted the city as a battleground. But the results were disappointing. Many of those arrested were small players, easily replaceable. The real power figures, including King, remained out of reach. Even more concerning, every time police closed in on a lead, it vanished. Witnesses withdrew their statements, evidence went missing, and informants turned up dead or disappeared without a trace. The streets of Liverpool became eerily quiet. Businesses reopened, but fear lingered like fog. People whispered that the Mercer Group had orchestrated the whole thing to test the system's response, and the system had failed. King's influence reached beyond the underworld. He had eyes in the very institutions meant to stop him. Detectives grew frustrated as their investigations were repeatedly compromised from within. Every failure deepened the mystery surrounding the man who controlled everything but left no trace of himself. Meanwhile, the explosion's aftermath revealed something else: a shift in power. The remaining gangs that once dominated Liverpool now answered to the Mercer Group. They acted as local distributors, maintaining control of their territories, but paying tribute to King. It was a perfect balance of fear and profit. The violence that once defined the city was replaced by quiet submission. To outsiders, it looked like Liverpool had found peace. But for those who understood the underworld, it was the peace of domination, the calm that follows complete control. The city was no longer fighting for survival, it was already conquered, and somewhere, hidden behind layers of secrecy, King watched it all unfold, untouchable, invisible, and still one move ahead. The breakthrough came unexpectedly, from someone who had been inside the Mercer Group for years. A former accountant, tired watching his family live in fear, decided to turn whistleblower. He had spent years managing the Mercer Group's finances, overseeing offshore accounts, and ensuring that every illegal transaction remained invisible. The man had seen it all: shell companies in Cyprus, coded messages that disguised shipments as legal imports, and layers of laundering that masked millions in drug profits. His decision to cooperate with authorities was dangerous, but he knew it was the only way to stop the empire he had helped build. Once in contact with the National Crime Agency, the accountant provided a treasure trove of information. Every transaction, every hidden account, and every link to shell companies across Europe was documented. Investigators could finally see the scope of King's empire. The evidence showed that King wasn't just controlling Liverpool. He had connections in ports across the UK, in warehouses in Belgium, and in financial institutions that unknowingly laundered his money. His influence extended far beyond what anyone had imagined. The whistleblower's files revealed that the Mercer Group had infiltrated legal businesses as well: construction, transportation, and even entertainment companies. All fronts to move cash while remaining untouchable. Armed with this new evidence, authorities coordinated a series of raids that targeted the Mercer Group's network across the country. Banks, warehouses, offices, and homes were simultaneously stormed. Officers uncovered millions in cash, high-grade weapons, drugs, and detailed records of transactions designed to hide illegal activities. For the first time, investigators had a glimpse of how methodical and meticulous King's operation really was. Every corner of Liverpool, every shipment, every payment had been carefully managed to maintain his invisible grip on the city. Despite the massive operation, King himself remained elusive. Every attempt to locate him hit a dead end. Some investigators believed he had fled abroad. Others suspected he was hiding in plain sight, posing as a legitimate businessman or investor. His anonymity became both his shield and his weapon. While his lieutenants were arrested and key facilities seized, King continued to orchestrate operations from a distance. The raids sent a message, but they did not end his influence. Even captured associates refused to reveal his location, either out of loyalty, fear, or the certainty that the empire would survive without them. The revelation of the Mercer Group's financial and institutional infiltration shook Liverpool to its core. Citizens who had long feared gang violence now realized the scale of the corruption around them. Politicians, bankers, and law enforcement officers were implicated, exposing a network of complicity that extended far beyond the streets. Ordinary residents understood for the first time that the control they had feared was not just physical, it was economic, social, and nearly invisible. Even as law enforcement celebrated their victories, the story remained unfinished. King's empire had been fractured, but it had not been destroyed. Smaller operations continued, quietly generating revenue and influence. The city had glimpsed the full power of a criminal mastermind, a man who had redefined how gangs operated, blending fear with strategy, violence with finance, and invisibility with control. Liverpool had been shaken, but the shadow of King remained over the streets. Even in the aftermath of the raids, the message was clear. He was still out there, silent, watching, and always one step ahead. The city had survived, but the war against its unseen ruler was far from over. Today, Liverpool appears calm, compared to the chaos of just a few years ago, but the scars left by the Mercer Group run deep. The city's streets, once defined by open violence and fear, now operate under a quieter, more insidious form of control. The gangs that once ruled with aggression have splintered into smaller, cautious factions. They no longer dare to challenge each other openly, and they certainly do not act without considering who might be watching. Many former gang members turned to legitimate work or fled the city, leaving behind a quieter, more watchful criminal underworld. On the surface, it looks like Liverpool has regained its peace, but those who lived through the war know better. King's legacy continues to shape the city, even in his absence. The Mercer Group's strategies, secret networks, coded communication, and financial dominance have left a blueprint for organized crime that others now emulate. Even the smallest drug dealers have learned to move with discretion, hiding operations behind legal businesses, using cryptocurrency, and avoiding the high-profile violence that once drew attention from law enforcement. In effect, King has trained a new generation of criminals, teaching them that silence and strategy are more powerful than guns and chaos. The fear that once gripped the streets has transformed into respect and sometimes paranoia for the invisible hand that controls the city. Despite the disruption caused by law enforcement raids and whistleblower revelations, King himself remains untraceable. No one knows whether he escaped abroad, is hiding in plain sight, or has even died. Every so often, mysterious shipments go missing, or a rival dealer disappears, reminding everyone that the city is still under unseen supervision. Residents whisper about figures moving silently through neighborhoods, about businesses that always seem to thrive no matter the economy, and about money flowing where it should not. Even the police, though more prepared than before, understand that the real threat is no longer visible on street corners. It exists in shadowy networks and coded transactions. Communities are slowly rebuilding, reclaiming spaces that were once no-go zones, reopening businesses, and attempting to restore trust between neighbors. Yet the memory of the gang wars lingers. Parents teach children which streets to avoid, and young people grow up aware that the city's peace may be fragile. Journalists and historians note that while Liverpool has changed, the events of the past decade serve as a warning. Criminal empires do not end easily, and power once established can persist quietly, unseen. The story of Liverpool's gangs and the rise of the Mercer Group remains a cautionary tale of ambition, intelligence, and the shadows that exist behind every city's prosperity. King may no longer be visible, but his influence continues to ripple through Liverpool's streets, shaping behavior, shaping decisions, and shaping the underworld's understanding of power. The city has survived the bloodshed, but the lessons are unmistakable. Control can be invisible, domination can be subtle, and even in peace, the echoes of a powerful criminal empire linger. Liverpool's past reminds everyone that beneath the historic buildings, the bustling docks, and the busy streets, a quiet, calculated force can continue to shape lives, and that Britain's most dangerous streets are never truly free from the influence of those who understand power in the shadows.